All right, so today we're going to talk about gross domestic product or GDP, right? We've already talked a little bit about this, but we're going to get into a little bit more depth this time around. So we should be aware that GDP is the total dollar value of all final, keyword there, is final goods and services produced within a country in a given year. It doesn't matter if it was produced by a foreign company. As long as it's produced within our borders, we are going to count it toward our GDP. Now, there's two ways that we calculate GDP. The first one is called the expenditures approach. And this is the one you guys are responsible for learning for class, right? Which is consumer spending plus gross business investment plus government spending plus net exports. But we also have the income approach. Now, it doesn't matter which one we use, we're going to get the same numbers, right? We prefer to use the expenditures approach because we get the answers a lot quicker, right? So this is not something that you are going to definitely have to need to know, but it might be one question on the multiple choice. So, if you want to pick up that extra cheap point, we should know what the income approach is, the formula, right? It should be known that it is W for wages plus R for rent plus I for interest and plus P for profits. If we add all of those up, we get the same results that we get from the expenditures approach. But remember, this is the one we are going to have to learn for class. Now, let's break up the individual components of our GDP and talk a little bit more about them before we talk about what we would not count as part of our economy, right? So first part that we talked about was consumer spending, right? And this is short for personal consumer spending or consumption spending, however you want to think about this. All right, and what we need to know, right, 67% of our economy is based on consumer spending. Remember, we have trillions of dollars. Our economy is worth trillions of dollars. And 67% of that is our spending alone. Right? But remember, when we're talking about consumer spending, we're talking about the purchase of finished goods and services. All right, finished goods and services. But not houses. We will talk about houses shortly, right? But just know that if you do buy a house, it is not considered to be personal spending. It's not consumer spending. Next thing we're going to talk about is IG, which is short for gross private business investment. All right. So when we talk about gross private business investment, we should be aware that we are not talking about your traditional investments like stocks and bonds, right? What are we talking about? We're talking about getting factory equipment maintenance, right? If you call in the repairman and he comes in and fixes your equipment, guess what? When you pay him, what are you doing? You're actually making an investment in your business. And the same is true when you buy new factory equipment, right? You are spending that money because you need to put it in your factory so it can help you make money, right? So that is also considered an investment. If you have any unsold inventory of whatever product you are producing and releasing to the mass market, if you did, I'm sorry, it should not say investment, it should say inventory. If you have not sold it, it doesn't mean you're losing money. What does it mean? It means you can sell it later and recoup your money later, right? So it's still considered an investment. And this is where we're going to count houses, right? But not the purchase of house. We're going to count the construction of the house. right? When we're building it, we have to pay for all of the equipment, right? All of the PVC pipes, all of the lumber, window panes, glasses, the glass windows, right? Bricks, lumber, anything, right? The insulation, all of this is added up when the contractor buys it. That's when we count it, guys. We do not count the actual sale of the house. All right, so that's consumer spending, that's gross business investment, and that is going to bring us to government spending, right? G for government spending, right? This is short for government spending. And just like it sounds, guys, government spending, what is it going to include? This is going to include government purchases of goods and services. If the government writes a check for your grandparents' Social Security payments, guys, that is not government spending. That is considered to be a transfer payment, right? So what we count in government spending is when they actually purchases of goods and services. When they're paying for goods and services, that is when it counts as government spending, guys. And then we have our last one, which is XN, which is actually means the net foreign factors of trade, right? Net foreign factors of trade. All right, we should be familiar with this already. We talked about trade in the first unit, and we should know, how do we calculate for net exports? Well, we take our exports and we subtract our imports, and that will give us our net exports right there. All right, so that kind of wraps up the stuff that gets included in our GDP, but what about the stuff that do not count? All right, so as to the items that do not count in GDP, we are not going to count used goods or secondhand goods. Why not? Because we count them the original time that they were sold. We are not, remember, this is think of it kind of accounting. We do not count things twice. We are only going to count them once. So we counted them the first time it was sold. We're not going to count them every additional time that it was resold. We are not going to count gifts or transfers. Right, I can give every single one of you guys $100. That is not going to count toward our GDP until you go out and spend it. Same thing with transfer payments, right? If your grandparents get a $1,000 check for Social Security in the mail, that's not government spending, that's a transfer payment. That's not going to count toward our GDP until your grandparents actually go out and purchase something with that money. We are not going to count stocks, bonds, or any other kind of equity purchase, right? When you're buying a stock, you're not producing anything. You're buying an imaginary piece of a company. As for bonds, what you're doing is you're lending the government money. They promise to pay you back later with interest, right? That is also not going to count toward our GDP. We are not going to count any unreported business activities conducted in cash. All right, if you work as a server somewhere and you get a $200 tip and you only report $20, guess what? That other $180 is not going to count toward our GDP, right? So it's not just unreported tips, guys. It could be maybe you're working for your uncle and he pays you in cash under the table. That's also not going to count toward our GDP, right? All right, next we have any illegal activities. Buying your quote-unquote medication from the local neighborhood street pharmacist is not going to count toward our GDP, guys. When you go buy your películas piratas from La Pulga, that also does not count toward our GDP. Right, we're not going to count financial transactions between banks or businesses. Why? Because nothing is getting done, guys. You're just moving money around from one pocket into the other. So we are not going to count that as well. Another thing we are not going to count are intermediate goods. And now I know what you're asking. What is an intermediate good? An intermediate good is, think of it as when you're purchasing a car and that car has a stereo. You're not going to buy the car and then pay for the stereo. The stereo is built into the price of the car, as are the tires, as are the rims, right? Those are considered to be intermediate goods. They're part of the product that you are purchasing. We're not going to count those individually. We're going to count the final purchase of the car, 25,000, 35,000, 45,000, whatever it cost you, that is what we will count. And last but not least, we're also not going to count non-market activities. Like what? What are non-market activities? Think of family work or volunteer work. Right? Your dad has you wash his truck and your mom's car, and he pays you $20 for that. That doesn't count, guys. It's family work. What your dad did was move money from one of his pockets into another one of his pockets, yours, and that does not count toward GDP until you go and spend that money. Likewise, with volunteer work, none of that gets added into the total dollar value of our GDP at the end of the year. If you guys have any questions, please let me know, and I will get back to you as soon as I can.